Welcome back, everyone. We're going to be solving LeetCode 200, number of islands. So we're given an m by n 2D binary grid, which represents a map of ones and zeros. The ones represent the land, zeros represent water. We need to return the number of islands represented inside of this grid. So example 1, I know it's kind of hard to see, but they give an output of 1 because there's only one island here. Right, so these two ones are now connected to these 3 and then these 4 right here. So how can we solve this? I know this is a pretty popular question, and there is another question that's pretty similar to it. I think it's called battleships on a board. We're going to solve that too. But we can solve this with depth first search and breadth first search. So this question I will solve with depth first search, and then the battleships question I'll solve with breadth first. That way, we're seeing both variations of the problem. Okay, so like I said, we are going to solve it with depth first search. So what do we need for that algorithm? Well, we need a stack, right? So we'll say our stack is equal to an empty array. We want to return the number of islands. So we're going to have some sort of count variable. So we'll set that equal to 0. And we are also going to have a visited set for this problem to keep track of the positions in our grid that we have visited. So now what we have to do is loop through every row and every column in our grid. And whenever we run into a 1 and that row column pair is not within our visited set, we're going to run depth first search. So let's do this. We'll say for row in the range length of our grid, right? So the length of our grid is going to, or the range length of our grid in example 1 is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. So this will be from 0 to 4. And we will do the same thing for the column. So for column in range length of grid 0, what are we going to do? We need to check and see if we have run into a 1 yet. So we will say if grid of our row column pair, if that is equal to a 1, and we have not visited this row column pair before, not in visited, then we're going to immediately increment our count. That means we have run into a brand new island we haven't come across before. So count plus equals 1. And we will also add this row column pair onto our stack because we have to run depth first search on this row column pair. So we'll say stack.append the row column pair and then just run depth first. So we'll say while the length of our stack is not equal to 0, what are we going to do? We are going to grab the row column pair with stack.pop. Now we are going to check and make sure that the row column pair we just popped off, if that is a valid row column pair within our grid. So we can't have -1 for our row or -1 for our column, right? That's outside of our grid. So we need to check and make sure that our row column pairs are within our grid, valid ranges. So we'll say if row, if that is greater than or equal to 0 and less than the length of our grid, and right, we have to check the column. So we'll do the same exact thing for the column. If that is less than or equal to 0 and less than the length of grid 0, what are we going to do? We are first going to check to see if we have visited this pair. So we'll say if the row column pair is not in visited and the grid at the row column pair, if that is equal to a 1, then what are we going to do? We are going to add this row column pair to our visited set. So we will say visited.add the row column pair. Now, in order to run depth first on a grid, we need to add the different positions of our row and columns to our stack. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we're at 0, 1, 2, if we're at this position right here, we need to add row -1 and column -1, row +1 and column +1 to our stack, right? So we'll say stack.append the pair of whatever our current row is right now, +1, along with the current column, right? So if we're at this position, we would add in this row column pair to our stack. So we will also add in stack.append the row -1 and the current column. So if we're at 0 this time, right, we would add in this row right here. If we're at this one, we would add in whatever our current row is, which would be 0. We would add in -1 and then whatever the current column is. That's why we check right here if the row column pair is a valid pair within our grid. And then we'll do the same thing for the columns. So stack.append the current row along with the next column, and stack.append the current row along with the previous column. And then at the end of this, we can just return the count after this for loop runs. So we'll say return the count. So let's run this. Perfect, we pass both test cases. So we'll submit. Awesome, we passed the submission cases. So time and space complexity. Time complexity is going to be O of RC, R times C, where R is the number of rows in our grid, C is the number of columns in our grid, and the space complexity is going to be the same. We are going to store the row column pairs within our visited set. All right, that'll do it for LeetCode 200.